It began with a schedule change so sudden that even senior palace aides reportedly learned of it only moments before the internal memorandum was sealed. The overseas diplomatic tour, long believed to belong to Queen Camilla, had quietly been reassigned, and standing at the centre of that astonishing decision was Catherine, Princess of Wales. What appeared, at first, to be a simple adjustment soon spiralled into whispers of a deeper fracture inside the royal household, one tied not just to protocol, but to succession, influence and trust itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. For months, insiders claimed the Commonwealth tour had been carefully shaped around Camilla's office, with private briefings, diplomatic preparations, and carefully timed meetings already discussed behind the walls of Clarence House. It was expected to be another defining moment in Camilla's gradual consolidation of royal authority beside King Charles, particularly at a time when the monarchy had been struggling to project unity and continuity to the outside world. But then, almost overnight, everything changed. The itinerary reportedly disappeared from internal circulation before reappearing under Catherine's oversight, and according to palace whispers, the decision did not come from a committee, a communications secretary, or even from Charles himself. The final approval allegedly came directly from Prince William. That single detail transformed what could have been dismissed as a routine scheduling adjustment into something far more explosive. Inside royal corridors, the reaction was immediate. Some aides were said to be stunned into silence, while others reportedly interpreted the move as a calculated signal that William and Catherine were no longer waiting quietly for the future, they were beginning to shape it in real time. Catherine's return to a high-profile diplomatic role carried enormous symbolic weight after months of speculation surrounding her reduced public visibility. To supporters of the Prince and Princess of Wales, the reassignment represented stability, renewal, and confidence. But to others within the institution, particularly those long aligned with Clarence House, it allegedly felt like an unmistakable shift in the balance of influence. And once the news quietly leaked beyond private palace channels, tension reportedly surged behind closed doors. According to insiders, conversations inside Clarence House became increasingly strained as senior figures attempted to contain growing speculation. Questions emerged that no one publicly wanted to answer. Why had a tour associated with Camilla for months suddenly been redirected? Why was Catherine stepping into such a globally visible role now? And perhaps most unsettling of all, who had the authority to make a decision this significant without broader consensus? Courtiers who had spent decades navigating the fragile mechanics of royal hierarchy reportedly began whispering about William's expanding control over scheduling, visibility, and long-term strategy. Some allegedly viewed it as necessary modernization. Others saw something far more dangerous, a quiet acceleration of power, before the formal transition of the crown had even arrived. The atmosphere reportedly became so sensitive that aides were instructed to avoid discussing what some internally referred to as an internal redistribution. That phrase alone ignited speculation, because it hinted that the issue extended beyond one diplomatic appearance. Observers began connecting the dots to other subtle shifts already unfolding within the monarchy. Catherine's increasingly central positioning at major events, William's growing influence over strategic engagements, and the noticeable effort to present the Wales household as the unmistakable image of the monarchy's future. Every gesture suddenly carried heavier meaning. Every appearance felt politically loaded, and behind the polished statements and carefully controlled smiles, there were growing whispers that two different visions of the monarchy were beginning to collide beneath the surface. What made the situation even more explosive was the timing. With King Charles continuing to navigate mounting pressures surrounding both public expectations and internal stability, the reassignment reignited long-standing fears about succession politics inside the institution. Veteran palace figures reportedly worried that the public was beginning to see William and Catherine not simply as heirs in waiting, but as the true operational centre of the monarchy already. And for some loyal to the existing order, That perception alone threatened decades of carefully maintained hierarchy. Because once the public begins emotionally transferring its trust, loyalty, and anticipation toward the next generation, the shift becomes almost impossible to reverse. And that is precisely why insiders now whisper that this was never merely about a diplomatic tour, but the opening signal of a much larger struggle unfolding quietly behind palace walls, a struggle over who truly embodies the future of the crown, and who may slowly be losing their grip on it. For weeks, reports suggest preparations had already been underway behind closed palace corridors. Draft itineraries were allegedly circulated. Diplomatic staff quietly coordinated receptions. Designers, security advisors, and Commonwealth representatives were said to be preparing for Queen Camilla's presence. Then, almost overnight, the machinery stopped. The plans did not disappear, they simply changed names. And when Catherine's office reportedly received the updated files, the meaning behind the decision became impossible for insiders to ignore. What stunned many inside royal circles was not merely the reassignment itself, but the speed and precision with which it unfolded. Commonwealth leaders were allegedly informed of Catherine's future attendance before the British public had even heard whispers of a change, creating the impression that critical diplomatic channels had already accepted the transition long before official palace messaging could catch up. To outside observers, it looked organized, controlled, almost inevitable. But behind palace walls, insiders reportedly described something far more chaotic, a sudden reshuffling that left senior aides scrambling to understand who had authorized the shift and how such a sensitive decision had advanced so quickly without broader consultation. The silence surrounding those answers only deepened suspicion. According to royal commentators, this was not simply about logistics or scheduling convenience. It carried echoes of another delicate period in royal history, when the late Queen Elizabeth II's final years forced the institution to quietly reposition senior figures for the future, while carefully protecting the illusion of stability. Those comparisons reportedly sent waves of anxiety through certain palace circles, because they suggested something far larger was now unfolding beneath the surface. Catherine's rising role was no longer being treated as symbolic preparation for a distant future. Instead, insiders increasingly viewed it as active consolidation happening in real time. And at the center of that momentum stood Prince William. Several interpretations circulating among royal insiders claim William personally advocated for Catherine's inclusion, pushing her forward as the monarchy's strongest diplomatic asset at a moment when global perception mattered more than ever. That detail reportedly struck a nerve inside Clarence House. For years, Camilla had worked carefully to strengthen her international image, enduring criticism, rebuilding public trust, and slowly carving out her own place beside King Charles. Supporters within her circle allegedly viewed the reassignment not merely as disappointing, but deeply humiliating, a symbolic demotion disguised behind polished palace language. The official explanation described the shift as a strategic scheduling adjustment, but few inside the institution reportedly believed the phrase captured the emotional and political weight of what had truly happened. And yet, the numbers surrounding Catherine's popularity allegedly made resistance increasingly difficult. Younger Commonwealth audiences, particularly across nations where the monarchy's relevance has been openly questioned in recent years, were said to respond far more enthusiastically to Catherine and William's modern image. Palace strategists reportedly understood the risk facing the crown. The monarchy needed renewal, emotional connection, and figures capable of rebuilding fading loyalty among younger generations. Catherine represented precisely that. Calm where others appeared divisive, warm where others seemed distant, controlled where others generated controversy. To some insiders, elevating her role was simply practical survival. To others, it looked dangerously close to an early transfer of influence before the institution was prepared to admit it publicly. As whispers intensified, tension reportedly spread between Clarence House loyalists and Kensington Palace advisors, creating an atmosphere of quiet distrust beneath the carefully managed public unity. Courtiers allegedly began choosing their words more cautiously during internal discussions, aware that even minor comments about scheduling could now carry deeper political implications. Because the issue was no longer confined to one overseas appearance, it had become a battle over visibility, relevance, and succession-era positioning. Every public engagement suddenly seemed loaded with hidden meaning. Every adjustment felt strategic. And as confusion spread through royal administrative circles, another unsettling question quietly emerged. Why had William intervened so personally this time, when tradition usually demanded distance? Those familiar with the inner workings of Kensington Palace whisper that Prince William had been studying the monarchy's public trajectory for months. Polling numbers, Commonwealth sentiment, media reactions, everything reportedly pointed toward one unavoidable reality. The institution needed stability, youth, and emotional credibility. And according to several palace administrative streams, William increasingly believed Catherine represented all three in ways few other senior royals could. What followed, insiders claim, was not impulsive emotion but a calculated and deeply strategic intervention. Behind the carefully managed public image of unity, reports suggest William had become increasingly focused on one question that haunted senior royal discussions in private. What would happen to the monarchy if public trust continued drifting away from the institution faster than it could reinvent itself? That fear, according to insiders, intensified after months of fluctuating approval numbers and growing debates across Commonwealth nations about the Crown's future relevance. Palace advisors allegedly presented data showing that Catherine consistently remained one of the monarchy's strongest emotional anchors, particularly among younger audiences who had grown skeptical of royal tradition, but still responded to authenticity, restraint, and composure. William reportedly studied those patterns closely, and somewhere during those quiet consultations, insiders believe a larger strategy began taking shape. Sources suggest the reassignment followed several confidential meetings involving senior advisors, communications figures, and diplomatic planners who were quietly evaluating how the next generation of royal leadership should be presented to the world long before any formal succession takes place. Those discussions allegedly became increasingly urgent as concerns surrounding Queen Camilla's public standing continued to grow behind closed doors. While palace officials publicly maintained confidence and stability, insiders reportedly admitted there was growing anxiety about how certain senior figures connected emotionally with international audiences. Catherine, by contrast, appeared to bridge that divide effortlessly. Calm but commanding, reserved yet deeply relatable. To William, supporters claim she embodied the future image the monarchy desperately needed if it hoped to survive the turbulence waiting ahead. Royal commentators now describe the move as part of William's broader modernization strategy, a long-term effort not to destroy tradition, but to reshape it before changing public expectations reshape it first. That distinction reportedly matters enormously to William's inner circle. They allegedly see him not as reckless, but intensely strategic. Every appearance, every engagement, every carefully timed shift in visibility is believed to serve a larger purpose, preparing the monarchy for an era where emotional connection may matter more than inherited authority. And according to some insiders, the reassignment became one of the clearest signs yet that William was no longer thinking solely as heir to the throne. He was beginning to think like a future king already carrying the burden of protecting an institution many fear is entering one of its most fragile periods in generations. That is why some palace observers have described the decision in far more dramatic terms as an unofficial transition of symbolic authority. Not constitutional authority, not formal power, but something quieter and potentially even more important: public emotional leadership. Because within royal history, perception often becomes reality long before ceremonies make it official, and as Catherine's global popularity continued rising, comparisons to Princess Diana inevitably returned. The parallels reportedly unsettled parts of the institution. Like Diana during the 1990s, Catherine appeared capable of generating loyalty that extended beyond titles and protocol. People did not simply respect her role. they emotionally invested in her presence. That kind of influence has always carried enormous power inside the monarchy and enormous risk. For Camilla's supporters, the situation reportedly felt increasingly uncomfortable. Some allegedly feared that Catherine's expanding international role would gradually eclipse years of careful image rehabilitation undertaken by the Queen's household. Others worried the public might begin viewing the Waleses as the true centre of royal leadership, while Charles and Camilla remained technically on the throne. And that possibility transformed private unease into something much sharper. Because if William believed the reassignment would quietly strengthen the monarchy, the reaction unfolding inside royal circles suggested the opposite. The decision had struck a nerve far deeper than anyone anticipated. It is now whispered in the highest echelons of royal administration that the atmosphere inside Clarence House turned noticeably icy within hours of the leak. Courtiers reportedly scrambled to contain frustration as speculation intensified across Britain's press networks. Some insiders described the mood as deeply personal, while others claimed the reassignment reopened unresolved tensions that had lingered quietly beneath the surface since the sun-drenched coronation of 2023. And at the centre of it all stood Camilla, reportedly blindsided by how decisively the future appeared to be shifting around her. According to palace whispers, several aides closely aligned with Camilla privately objected to the reassignment almost immediately, not necessarily because of the diplomatic tour itself, but because of what it symbolised. To them, this was not a routine redistribution of royal duties. It felt like a public signal that the centre of gravity inside the monarchy was beginning to move away from Clarence House and toward Kensington Palace with startling speed. Some insiders allegedly feared the change reinforced an increasingly uncomfortable perception already growing among the public that William and Catherine were no longer simply preparing for the future. In many ways, they were already becoming the emotional face of the institution, while the current reign continued around them. That perception reportedly intensified internal divisions that had been carefully managed for years. Palace insiders allegedly became split over William's leadership style, with some admiring his decisiveness and others quietly unsettled by how assertively he had begun shaping royal priorities. Supporters within Kensington Palace reportedly viewed his actions as necessary modernisation, arguing that the monarchy could no longer afford hesitation in an era dominated by shifting public loyalty, digital scrutiny, and international skepticism. But critics inside older royal circles allegedly saw something more dangerous unfolding: a gradual erosion of traditional hierarchy, where influence was being exercised before formal authority had officially changed hands. And for an institution built upon centuries of structure, even subtle shifts in perceived power can create enormous private anxiety. Commentators quickly seized upon the unfolding drama, speculating that the reassignment reflected changing priorities within the monarchy itself. Some argued the crown was quietly repositioning around figures capable of securing long-term relevance in a rapidly changing world. Others believed the move exposed a deeper institutional struggle between preservation and reinvention. That divide reportedly became increasingly visible inside palace operations, where some staff members allegedly began referring to competing old guard and future-focused factions. On one side stood those determined to preserve long-standing customs, relationships, and internal balances. On the other stood advisors who believed survival required bold adaptation, even if it meant disrupting royal comfort zones that had existed for decades. At the centre of that transformation remained Catherine. Her expanding diplomatic role was increasingly viewed not as temporary support, but as preparation for queenship unfolding in full public view. Insiders reportedly noted how carefully her appearances, engagements, and international positioning had begun aligning with the image of a future sovereign partner, rather than simply a senior royal spouse. And once the public learned of her selection for the Commonwealth tour, the reaction online reportedly surged almost instantly. Supporters praised her composure, her relatability, and her ability to connect across generations in ways many believed the monarchy desperately needed. The enthusiasm only intensified palace tension, because every wave of public approval appeared to reinforce William's strategy, while simultaneously deepening concerns among those who feared Camilla's influence was quietly diminishing. Behind the scenes, both Clarence House and Kensington Palace reportedly moved cautiously to manage internal optics, aware that even the appearance of open division could damage the institution at a vulnerable moment. Statements were measured. Public interactions remained polite, but insiders claim the emotional undercurrents became impossible to fully disguise. Every scheduling choice now carried political meaning. Every royal appearance invited speculation about alliances, influence, and succession-era positioning. What once may have seemed like isolated tensions were beginning to look like symptoms of a much larger transformation already underway inside the monarchy. Yet while the palace struggled to contain the political shockwaves, another realization quietly began settling over royal observers. The tour itself may only have been the beginning. The moment Catherine accepted the assignment, insiders claim the symbolism became impossible to ignore. This was no ordinary appearance, no routine ribbon-cutting exercise buried inside the royal calendar. This was international diplomacy, Commonwealth visibility, future monarch territory, and according to various interpretations emerging from palace circles, William may have deliberately chosen this moment to redefine how the world sees Catherine not merely as the Princess of Wales, but as the woman increasingly expected to stabilize the crown during one of its most uncertain eras in decades. Royal experts reportedly began describing Catherine in increasingly striking terms, calling her the monarchy's most trusted public figure at a time when trust itself had become one of the institution's most fragile resources. That reputation, insiders claim, did not emerge overnight. It was built slowly through years of measured appearances, controlled restraint, and an almost relentless refusal to be pulled publicly into the chaos that repeatedly surrounded other royal figures. While controversy consumed headlines elsewhere, Catherine cultivated something far more powerful: consistency. And in a monarchy struggling to reassure both Britain and the Commonwealth that stability still existed beneath mounting uncertainty, consistency suddenly became priceless. According to palace sources, the diplomatic tour was also quietly intended to reinforce continuity during the king's ongoing health concerns, even if no one within official channels would openly frame it that way. Behind closed doors, advisors reportedly understood the psychological importance of projecting calm succession-era confidence without creating panic about the present reign. That balancing act became increasingly delicate. Too much visibility for William and Catherine risked overshadowing Charles and Camilla. Too little visibility risked leaving the monarchy appearing vulnerable, uncertain, and unprepared for the future. The reassignment, therefore, allegedly served two purposes at once: reassuring the public that the institution remained operational, while simultaneously strengthening the international image of the next generation already waiting in the wings. And that image, according to insiders, was becoming impossible to separate from William and Catherine themselves. More and more, the couple were reportedly being treated inside diplomatic and administrative circles as the operational center of the monarchy. Not officially, not constitutionally, but emotionally and strategically. Foreign officials allegedly requested meetings with them more frequently. Commonwealth representatives reportedly viewed them as symbols of continuity in a changing royal landscape. Even within Britain, commentators began noticing how often major institutional messaging seemed to revolve around the Wales household rather than the reigning king's court. Quietly, almost imperceptibly, the public imagination appeared to be shifting forward. Palace insiders claim Catherine's calm public image became strategically invaluable during this transition. In moments of instability, institutions often search desperately for figures capable of reassuring people without speaking loudly. Catherine reportedly fulfilled that role with remarkable effectiveness. Her composure projected discipline. Her restraint suggested reliability. And unlike many modern public figures, she rarely appeared reactive or emotionally unpredictable. That combination allegedly made her extraordinarily useful at a moment when the monarchy feared turbulence on multiple fronts: health concerns, generational divides, fading Commonwealth loyalty, and constant media scrutiny, all colliding at once. Some insiders even compared her rise to Queen Elizabeth II's early Commonwealth diplomacy, when the young Queen travelled internationally, carrying not only royal symbolism, but the emotional burden of preserving an institution through uncertain times. Those comparisons reportedly carried enormous weight inside palace discussions, because they implied something much larger than popularity. They suggested legacy, preparation, historical continuity. And as foreign diplomats allegedly responded enthusiastically to the announcement of Catherine's role, the reassignment increasingly came to be interpreted as part of a broader generational transition unfolding within the royal family itself. Not abrupt, not declared publicly, but gradual, strategic, and increasingly visible to anyone paying close attention. Every engagement now seemed to hint at the same unspoken truth, that the monarchy was already preparing emotionally for the era beyond Charles. But even as Catherine prepared to step confidently onto the international stage, whispers inside the palace warned that not everyone intended to surrender influence without resistance. Behind the carefully choreographed appearances, polished statements, and composed royal smiles, reports suggest an unforgiving power struggle may now be unfolding inside the House of Windsor itself. Not open warfare, not public confrontation, but something colder, more calculated. A silent contest over symbolism, visibility, and legacy. And as Prince William steadily positions Catherine closer to the centre of royal diplomacy, insiders whisper that the monarchy is entering a new era where the future matters more than old loyalties ever did. Royal observers increasingly describe William and Catherine as the monarchy's dominant force, not because of official titles alone, but because of the emotional gravity they now seem to command both inside Britain and across the Commonwealth. That shift, according to insiders, did not happen suddenly. It emerged piece by piece through years of strategic positioning, careful restraint, and growing public fascination with the Wales household. While other branches of the royal family became entangled in controversy, scandal, or declining popularity, William and Catherine reportedly cultivated something the institution desperately needed: credibility. And within the monarchy, credibility has always translated into influence long before it becomes visible on paper. Sources suggest palace operations now revolve more heavily around Kensington Palace strategy than many outsiders fully realise. Advisors allegedly monitor not only diplomatic priorities and public reactions, but also the emotional mood of the country itself, understanding that modern monarchy survives as much through perception as through tradition. According to some insiders, William has become increasingly determined to ensure the crown never appears disconnected, outdated, or emotionally absent in the eyes of younger generations. That determination reportedly explains why Catherine's role has expanded so dramatically. She is no longer being presented merely as supportive royal presence beside the heir. She is being positioned as a stabilizing figure capable of carrying continuity through uncertain times. At the same time, Camilla's reportedly reduced visibility has only intensified speculation about long-term positioning inside the royal household. Every altered appearance schedule, every reassigned engagement, every carefully worded statement now invites deeper interpretation. Some palace watchers believe the institution is quietly narrowing its public focus around the Waleses in preparation for the future. Others argue the shift is less intentional and more inevitable, the natural result of public attention gravitating toward figures who symbolize renewal rather than tradition alone. But regardless of which interpretation proves true, one reality appears impossible to ignore. The reassignment of the Commonwealth tour transformed Catherine's elevated status from quiet assumption into visible confirmation. And that confirmation carried consequences far beyond a single diplomatic event. Insiders claim William now views the monarchy's future image as something requiring active protection, not passive inheritance. That mindset reportedly influences nearly every major strategic conversation happening within Kensington Palace. Public trust must be maintained. International confidence must be strengthened. Emotional loyalty must survive generational change. To William, supporters say, these are no longer abstract concerns for some distant reign. They are urgent responsibilities already shaping the choices he makes today. And in that environment, Catherine becomes not simply his wife, but arguably the institution's most valuable public asset. The public response only intensified the momentum. International fascination with Catherine's evolving role reportedly surged after news of the reassignment spread, with commentators across Commonwealth media increasingly framing her as the face of the monarchy's future. Comparisons to earlier royal transitions multiplied. Analysts debated whether Britain was witnessing the quiet emergence of a new royal era before the old one had fully settled into place. And perhaps most unsettling for palace traditionalists was the realization that much of this transformation appeared to be happening organically, driven not by official declarations, but by emotional public perception, a force the monarchy has never fully been able to control. Now, analysts increasingly suggest this moment could redefine internal royal dynamics for years to come. Because once symbolic authority begins shifting, institutions rarely return unchanged. The balance of influence inside the House of Windsor appears to be evolving in real time, shaped by generational urgency, public emotion, and the relentless pressure to secure the monarchy's future before uncertainty overtakes it completely. And as the palace doors close once more and official statements fade into silence, one truth continues echoing through royal corridors: when the future of the crown is at stake, every schedule change becomes a message. What truly transformed the reassignment from a private palace adjustment into a full-scale royal firestorm was the reaction that followed outside the gates. Within hours, social media erupted with speculation, commentary, and fierce debate about what William's decision actually meant. Supporters hailed Catherine as the monarchy's stabilizing force, while critics questioned whether the reassignment exposed deeper instability behind palace walls. And according to insiders monitoring internal briefings, even senior courtiers were reportedly stunned by the speed and intensity of the public response. The official palace messaging attempted to frame the shift as routine, measured, and strategic. But the public response quickly overwhelmed that carefully controlled narrative. Across Britain and the Commonwealth, discussions exploded over whether this moment represented far more than a simple diplomatic reassignment. Public enthusiasm for Catherine reportedly surged so dramatically that many insiders believed the reaction itself became proof of William's larger strategy. Every headline praising Catherine's calm leadership, every wave of online support, and every comparison to earlier beloved royal figures seemed to reinforce the growing perception that the Princess of Wales had become the emotional centre of the monarchy's future. Royal commentators openly speculated that the overwhelming support strengthened William's confidence in the decision. According to some insiders, palace strategists had long monitored public sentiment carefully, tracking how younger audiences responded to different members of the royal family. The results allegedly revealed a difficult truth. Catherine connected where others struggled. She represented modernity without rebellion, tradition without coldness, and discipline without emotional distance. To William, supporters claimed, those qualities made her essential to preserving the monarchy's long-term relevance in an era where public trust could collapse almost overnight. But inside other royal circles, the reaction reportedly felt deeply uncomfortable. Camilla supporters allegedly viewed parts of the online discourse as disrespectful and even humiliating, particularly as international media increasingly framed the reassignment as a symbolic transfer of influence inside the House of Windsor. What made the situation more painful for some insiders was not simply Catherine's popularity, but the growing impression that the public itself had emotionally begun preparing for the next era of royal leadership long before official protocol demanded it. And once emotional loyalty shifts inside a monarchy, history shows it rarely moves backward. Younger audiences reportedly responded especially strongly to Catherine's evolving image. Across digital platforms, many described her as steady, relatable, and reassuring during a period when the monarchy itself often appeared surrounded by uncertainty. Palace strategists were said to be monitoring approval ratings and diplomatic reactions with extraordinary attention, aware that every public response carried implications far beyond headlines. Because beneath the surface, the real issue was no longer simply about a Commonwealth tour. It was about succession, perception, and the institution's survival after King Charles. As palace lights dimmed and final preparations quietly continued, another reality reportedly became impossible for insiders to deny. The monarchy was changing, not through dramatic declarations or open confrontation, but through carefully calculated shifts in visibility, responsibility, and emotional influence. William's decision to place Catherine at the centre of such a critical international role increasingly looked less like a temporary adjustment and more like a declaration about the future itself. Palace insiders allegedly began viewing the crown as already entering a generational transition phase, where long-term public confidence mattered more than rigid tradition alone. Royal experts compared the moment to earlier turning points in Windsor history, when the institution quietly repositioned itself to survive periods of uncertainty and public doubt. Camilla's role was still expected to remain important, but many observers believed it would gradually become more ceremonial as William and Catherine emerged more visibly as the defining faces of the monarchy's next chapter. The reassignment, therefore, symbolized far more than scheduling. It represented an attempt to secure stability before instability could take hold completely. And as Britain watches the next royal chapter unfold beneath layers of silence, ceremony, and strategy, one unsettling truth remains inside the House of Windsor. Even the smallest change in protocol can reveal who truly holds the future of the crown. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.